Hi, this is Dr. Robert Cywes, the Carb Addiction Doc, with another in our question and answer series. This one coming from Wilma Foster, or Vilma Foster in my country. I have been following in your presentations and I'm really impressed. I have been keto LCHF since last March, and now we're in 2020, and I'm still having issues with my fasting blood sugars. I can go to bed with a blood sugar of 90 and wake up with 120. I understand the dawn phenomenon, but was wondering if with your experience, you could maybe shed some light on this, please. Is this something that can resolve given more time? I don't touch the white stuff or processed food, yet I still seem to have the result. Only by fasting can I get my morning sugars down below 100, and that is usually after a 24 or 36-hour fast. Otherwise, I have lost 40 pounds and feel pretty good for my 68 years. Well, first of all, Wilma, congratulations. It sounds like you've made an amazing change already, and there are just a few tweaks that we can make going forward. My biggest concern is that you're on a ketogenic diet, not following a keto LCHF way of life. There are a couple of tweaks. First of all, you've made such a dramatic change to your quality of health and quality of life already. But the little tweaks that I would advocate for is number one, get your doctor to check your C-peptide and insulin level. That's the first way to know whether you still have a degree of insulin resistance or are now insulin sensitive, because that's really what we're after. Okay? And then based on where you are with those numbers, we can then tweak and make modifications to get you fully insulin sensitive. And the numbers I'm typically looking for is a C-peptide at 1 or below, and a blood insulin level, a fasting blood insulin level, typically taken in the morning, of below 6 to 4, 4 to 6. Okay? Certainly below 4 is ideal. If you're below 6, we're okay. If you're above that, then your body has not yet become insulin sensitive. It should, over time, return your insulin sensitivity, but there are a couple of things that I believe you may be doing that's roadblocking that. The first one, I like the intermittent fasting, but you should try to get to a point of what we call 2 MAD, or 2 meals a day, sometimes 1 meal a day. I don't call that fasting, I just call that not eating for periods of time. And if you can do MBN, which is nothing before noon, what you're telling me with the dawn effect is your liver is giving you breakfast by that elevated blood sugar. You don't need to eat in the morning. I have my trusted cup of coffee in the morning, and I won't eat before noon or before the evening time. So nothing before noon. So if you can avoid consuming calories until that dawn effect resolves. The second thing is, I'm not certain if you're in deep ketosis. It may be worthwhile to check your ketones and make sure you're somewhere above 0.5 but below 5 on your ketones. The best way to do that is with a Keto Mojo blood sugar and ketone device. But if not, you can even check your urine, although it's not quite as accurate. Keto Mojo is probably, for me, the best device, because on 1 drop of blood you get both the blood sugar and the ketones. I wouldn't worry so much about a blood sugar of 120. It will drift down, but the other piece that you can do is, instead of fasting for protracted periods of time, which is really unsustainable long term, if you rather migrate more and more toward carnivorous meals, because there is no sugar in carnivore. And it may be that some sauces have crept in, that some fruit has crept in, and I don't know this, but I would certainly check and make sure that you're aware of the total carbohydrate consumption of everything, or the total carbohydrate content of everything you eat and drink before you consume it. Because there may be some hidden carbs, you may be doing some lookalikes like keto bread or keto brownies. Get rid of those for now. This is not a keto diet. They always fail. This needs to become a ketogenic way of life. And you may say, oh my God, carnivore is too restrictive. Well, over time, it isn't. It isn't. It actually becomes a pretty cool way of eating, but that's up to you. At 68, this is marvelous. I love what you're doing. Okay? So whatever you do, don't walk and text, because you'll probably be run over by a car, because that's probably going to be the only way that you die. You're not going to die of metabolic disease if you keep doing this. I'm being silly, but congratulations on the journey, and take the next step. This next question comes from a Facebook person by the name of April Holbert. Hi, I've been low carb keto for 3 years this month. My hemoglobin A1C has been about 5.4 since that time. I dropped almost 30 pounds and everything was going pretty well. I still have about 10 pounds to lose, but I'm 53. Oh my God, that's young. Relative to my age, and haven't been exercising regularly, so understandable. So That's bullshit, by the way. Okay, your age has nothing to do with this. Neither has exercise. So throw those two in the garbage can. Um, so when I went for my blood work in November, my A1C had gone up from 5.4 to 5.8. I was devastated. I don't eat sugar, I don't eat grain, and I've even cut dairy mostly, except some hard cheeses. I bought a Keto Mojo recently and have been randomly checking my blood sugar. You don't say anything about checking your ketones. It has never been above 107. I'm very confused by this. So thank you very much for that question. And I understand some of the confusion. Again, if you're going to get blood work tested, please check your C-peptide and your insulin. We need to know whether you are insulin sensitive, insulin resistant, or possibly even heading toward type 1, although I'm not concerned about that. The major reason why we see A1Cs drifting up is a little bit of complacency and cockiness and just generally drifting backwards. If this is a keto diet, you've had such a good result that here and there we tend to give ourselves permission. And this is not a blame or an accusation thing. The first thing I want you to do is have a strict awareness of what it is that you're doing and maybe tighten it up just a little bit. Are you OMAD? Are you too mad? 1 meal a day, 2 meals a day? Don't look at what you're not eating. Look at what you are eating and look to see where the sources of some carbohydrates are that may have crept in. Are you having a snack here or there? Are you more on the carnivore side, or are you letting some starchy vegetables back in? I don't usually have a problem with that, but if you're trying to bump this down, that's what you need to know. Because here's the thing. My suspicion is your insulin level is going to be a little elevated, your C-peptide is going to be a little bit elevated, and you are somewhat insulin resistant. In other words, your insulin sensitivity is off, and therefore your system tolerates a higher average blood sugar. And my concern is that a normal person, a non-diabetic, even if you're a 2 that has now become gone into remission, your average blood sugar should be around 80, with a very small average fluctuation of about 10 points around that. You're probably at about 100 to 110 for your average. And that average elevated blood sugar is damaging your red blood cells, bumping your A1C up just a little bit. So the goal here would be to bring your average blood sugar down, and that is reflective of insulin sensitivity. So if you've got the Keto Mojo, I definitely would want to see you in ketosis, which is 0.5 to 5, and I'd like to see that blood sugar slowly ease down. Ignore blood sugar for the first 2 hours of the day, from awake to about 2 hours in. That's going to be the dawn effect. But for the most part through the day, I'd like to see that average well below 100. And the way you get there is by OMAD and being more and more carnivore and getting rid of itinerant little bits of carbohydrates that have crept in. You see, the problem with a ketogenic diet is they allow lookalikes. They allow keto brownies and keto bread, and they say berries are fine. Well, Eric Westman will tell you all day long that a berry is just a small fruit. And you want to stay away as clean as you can be. And I think if you've been devastated by this rise in A1C, you're prepared to make those so-called sacrifices to tighten up your diet a little bit. Hell, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've drifted big time. I call them relapses. But I've relapsed several times. And what you want to do every time is just tighten yourself up. And going more carnivore or going more pure leafy vegetable, that may be a way to tighten this up. And it takes time. It takes 120 days for those red cells to come down. So if you commit to a 90-day transformation, a real tightening up, you should see your A1C come down. But make sure your doctor does do a starting A1C, a starting C-peptide and insulin, and then in 3 or 4 months' time, repeat those numbers and make sure particularly that your insulin and your C-peptide have come down and that you're insulin sensitive. I hope this helps. Exercise. Well, let me ask you this. How much exercise do you have to do if you want to quit smoking? How much exercise does alcoholics have to do if they want to sober up and quit drinking? Well, obviously the answer is 0. How much exercise do you have to do if you want to lose weight? The answer is 0. Okay? The whole myth about exercise and physical activity came from Coca-Cola and people like that trying to protect the sugar in their drinks and saying, no, it's not the sugar in our drinks that are making you fat and diabetic. It's because you're fat and lazy and you don't exercise enough. And they created this whole Move More campaign. Exercise, physical activity is wonderful as an endorphin releaser, but it has no role to play directly in burning calories. That's ludicrous. The only way to get yourself onto a healthy diet is through becoming ketogenic, which means that you're living off ketone bodies rather than sugar. And there's a variety of different ways to do that. Whether you're eating in moderation, whether you're vegetarian, whether you're carnivore, any of that spectrum is fine. But exercise has no role to play in burning calories because obesity and diabetes are not calorie problems. Go to my YouTube channel and listen to the episode on calories. And Lord knows, at my current age, which is well above yours at 53, I'm healthier now than I was 20 years ago. So it's got nothing to do with age. I hope that helps, and I hope that clears some of the myths and inconsistencies in your thought process. Thanks for the question, April. This next question on Facebook comes from Cheryl Panaccia. Are you treating many of your patients with thyroid medication? I've been on keto for 3 years and had minimal weight loss with 40 pounds to lose, and having difficulty finding a doctor that will use the more recent values, TSH, thyroid hormones, using a carnivore approach to stimulate my weight loss. I'm a 68-year-old woman. What are your thoughts? Thanks for the question, Cheryl. And I think the whole issue of thyroid disease is so important. And both as a surgeon and as a keto doctor, I've got some thoughts on it, of course. I will have an upcoming podcast on thyroid hormone disease. But here's the way it works. The first thing is, most doctors nowadays test your thyroid hormone levels, and if they're low, they put you on thyroid hormone replacement. And they're either putting you on Synthroid, which is a pure T4, or they put you on the mixed T3, T4, which is the Thyroid, is a mixture of the two. The one is a recombinant human thyroid hormone. The other one is a porcine, comes from pigs, the Thyroid does, T3, T4. So it's important to understand that. And T3 is the more active component, and T4 often gets converted to T3, triiodothyronine, as the active forms of thyroid hormone. However, what most doctors fail to do these days is walk it backwards and figure out, okay, her thyroid hormone is low, why? And it might be a cancer of the thyroid, it might be a hot nodule of the thyroid or a cold thyroid, it might be a lack of iodine in the diet of the patient, or it may be Hashimoto's disease, an autoimmune disease. But the most common cause in the modern era of low thyroid hormone production is that originally, way back in the pathway of thyroid hormone production, it starts out as cholesterol. And then through a series of enzyme pathway changes, it becomes T3 and T4, which are the active components of thyroid hormone. Well, elevated insulin levels, and insulin is elevated in insulin resistance and prediabetes and diabetes type 2, insulin blocks the conversion of cholesterol downstream. So you may have an insulin blockade, you may have a low iodine. All of those things have to be figured out. So you need autoimmune disease checked, you need your iodine checked, you need your insulin and your C-peptide levels checked to determine what the cause of your disease is, because you may actually be able to treat your low thyroid disease at cause and not need medication for it. Because the problem is, once you're stuck on medication, you're kind of screwed, because now you're suppressing your thyroid and it's difficult to come back from that. Over 70% of the patients in my practice are on thyroid medication when they walk through the door. And less than 30% of my patients have a diagnosis as to why their thyroid is low. That means there's 40% of people on thyroid hormone who have no idea what the hell they're treating. And that's a problem for me. And that's a problem in modern medicine. So at least try to walk it back and figure out why. You may need thyroid hormone, but why? And could you eliminate it if you adapt your diet? And the key thing there is to get your insulin to be in a sensitive range rather than a resistant range by avoiding carbohydrates. So that for me is the most important thing. The second thing, Cheryl, is you're probably following a ketogenic diet, which is a harm reduction diet. It's probably a reduced carbohydrate diet. And you're probably still snacking. That is not a ketogenic diet. That's just kind of a fudge diet. So, and I don't mean to be insulting because I don't know the truth about this, but it is not possible to stay where you are and to be consistently following a ketogenic diet. It is not possible to be drunk or to have a positive blood alcohol level if you don't have alcohol. Okay? Same principle applies here. So if you're able to tighten up your ketogenic diet. And I love the fact that you want to go carnivore. That's the single best way to go. But even if you're somewhat vegetarian, eliminating the sources of carbohydrates and eliminating snacking from your diet using your coffee or a bridge item to get you across those moments without a snack, tightening that up and then repeating your thyroid hormone levels down the road, then you'll get a better idea of where you are. But I do think checking your iodine, depending on where you live, it may be an endemic goiter area in some parts of Italy, if you're Italian, may have that issue. It may also be an autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's that can be modified by coming on a low inflammatory diet, but it may also require you to continue to be on that thyroid hormone. And yeah, the combination T3, T4 pills like Thyroid is an effective way to go, probably a little bit better than Synthroid, but I would discuss that aspect with an endocrinologist. I tend still to use Synthroid for most of my patients because that's what I grew up with, but I'm not immune to learning more new knowledge. So hopefully that answers the question, but absolutely try carnivore and then repeat the numbers. But know what the numbers are going in so you can compare before and after. Thanks for the question. Okay. So the next question from Facebook comes from Martin Kaiser. Hey Martin, so the question is, if you have a high CAC, a coronary artery calcium score, eating low carb and improving your markers and losing weight, do you still need to consider statins as suggested by cardiologists? Thanks. This person, Martin, says that they have a family history. Well, Martin, I love the CAC score as a marker or an indicator of disease. What the CAC score looks at, it's a CT scan that images your coronary vessels, the blood vessels, the arteries that supply blood to the heart. And what they look for is little layers of calcium in the arteries themselves. Well, how does that calcium get there? The way that calcium gets there is through chronic injury, either nicotine or sugar, that injures the cells, the endothelial cells lining those blood vessels. When that injury happens, you form tiny little blood clots to heal the injury in those blood vessels. And if you're smoking or eating carbohydrates on a regular basis, the nicotine and the carbohydrates have a repetitive injury. So you've got the cycle of injury, heal, injury, heal, injury, heal. And slowly over time, you develop an atherosclerotic plaque. And the atherosclerotic plaque can either be the soft gelatinous one filled with fat, which is where your body's laying down fat, typically from LDL, to try to spackle over a hole in the wall to try to heal or seal that injury. But if your body is good enough to not even have the lipids stabilizing that clot, if the clot's coming and going all the time, one of the clotting factors, it's actually called factor 2 in the intrinsic blood clot, the clotting cascade that happens to seal up those little holes, is calcium. Calcium is actually factor 2 in the clotting cascade. So what happens is, when you form these little fibrin clots, whether they mature and require lipid or not, when the clot resolves, little bits of calcium get trapped in the wall of that blood vessel, and the calcium deposition is reflective of a chronic injury cycle that's happening all the time. Now, the body's modifying itself all the time. So if you stop the injury, if you quit smoking and you're not eating carbohydrates, slowly over time, that calcium may go away and your endothelial cell normality restores itself. But it takes a while. Now, in smokers, it can actually happen pretty quickly with a halving of that injury over about 6 months when you quit smoking. It's a little bit slower with carbohydrates, and that may be a little bit because of the lipid deposition. So the point is, the CAC score is a marker or a measure of chronic injury to the blood vessels, and it's a predictor of a risk of heart attack or stroke. So it's tightly tied to insulin resistance and diabetes. As you come off carbohydrates, if you don't smoke, and that's obviously the important point, as you come off carbohydrates, that CAC score improves. And typically you want to see it below 75, the closer to 0 it can be. But that's just a marker of disease resolution or disease occurrence. The statins do not significantly affect that CAC score. I know of no papers of comparing CAC scores with people on statins or off statins. The person to ask that of is Ivor Cummings, the Fat Emperor, and I would urge you to ask him that question. I just don't know of that result. But my suspicion is there'd be no difference. However, so therefore, you do not need, if that is true, you do not need statins. What you need is to come off carbohydrates and to quit smoking. And I hope that answers your question. The family history is perhaps about how quickly you form the disease, but you cannot form the disease if there's no nicotine or carbohydrates in your life. And that's the approach that I would use. Hopefully that helps. This is another question in our Q&A session from Facebook, and this one comes from a guy by the name of John Willis, and I'm so amazed by your story. This is a great story. I've heard you say before that your CGM climbs when you're prepared to go running. I have the opposite reaction. Mine drops dramatically when my shoes hit the track. Why is that? I was fasting this day till about 2ish, like normal, awoke about 4 a.m. My run knocked out the dawn phenomenon I always experience. I am a former type 2 diabetic with an A1C currently at 5.3, down from 16.6. Amazing, John. That's so cool. And you've lost 90 pounds. Fantastic. You've been on a strict ketogenic diet for 22 months. So let's dig into this. I don't have all the answers, but let's go back to biology. So the way this whole effect works, and it's interesting to see that you were up at 2 a.m. And 4 a.m. I'm not quite sure about those times, but the way your blood sugar should work, and you can look at your CGM, is that while you're asleep, your blood sugar should be fairly low. And you've given me some blood sugars there, but I don't see what your upper limit is. It looks a little bit on the high side. So typically for me, when I'm asleep and I'm fat adapted, my sleeping blood sugars are between 65 and 70, my resting blood sugar. As soon as I wake up, my dawn effect pushes that up. And I can jump by anywhere from 20 to 40 points in my blood sugar, usually about 20 points as a peak in the ensuing 2 hours. And that's a glucagon effect. And then as my insulin gets released, that comes down, even though I haven't eaten. So I'm not certain whether that's an aberration of the timing by which you're doing this. However, when you were that high with your diabetes at an A1C of 16.6, you were profoundly insulin resistant. In fact, your body just wasn't reacting to insulin at all. What you've done progressively is to restore insulin sensitivity. And with that insulin sensitivity, it affects two things. It affects cortisol production as well as a glucagon effect. Now, you've been fasting for a long period of time, so you need blood sugar while you've been fasting. And the effect of that blood sugar should come from glucagon putting a little bit of sugar into your bloodstream. And I don't know where your basal was. Was it at 65 to 70, or was it a little higher at about 90 to 100? And the reason why that's important is because if you're insulin sensitive, when you're 70 and you go from 70 to 80, there's a slow trickle of insulin that slowly brings that down. When you're already at 70, and you go for that run and you see when you're already at 90 to 100 and you see a little blip, if you're insulin sensitive, because you really want to clamp that blood sugar between 70 and 100, you're going to get a bigger release of insulin. And the effect that you're seeing, the paradox of seeing your blood sugar come way down, means that you released more insulin. You're insulin sensitive, but you released a massive amount of insulin, far more than you needed to begin your run. And also probably your cortisol effect wasn't quite what it could have been. So cortisol triggers the release of sugar, but if your cortisol effect wasn't that high, you released too much insulin, the paradox is it caused your blood sugar to go down. What happens with me is as I'm putting on my shoes, as I'm thinking about my run, my blood sugar goes up. Once I start, it drifts down. So I start to use up the sugar that I used. But in the fasting state, especially the prolonged fasting state, you've got ketones to use, but I notice, if that's the tracing that you've given me, that blood sugar dropped very, very low, and that is an insulin reaction. Now, over time, that'll smooth out. But here's something that I've heard from a number of athletes, and I've done a few of these podcasts and a few talks at various venues, and athletes have come to me and said exactly this. These are non-diabetic athletes, and they say if they've been on a fast for a long time, they're carnivore, they're OMAD carnivore, and they'll run on an empty stomach in ketosis. And what they find is their performance lags behind just a little bit. These are all carb loaders. So they'll tell you, you know what, in the old days when I used to carb load, I used to be able to hit that run. And yeah, down the road, I might bonk. But at least the start of my run was great. Now I kind of feel flat at the start of my run, and slowly over time that builds up. And my suspicion is that they're having exactly the same effect, that they're having, because they're insulin sensitive, a little overhit of insulin. And instead of seeing a rise in blood sugar at the beginning of their workout, they're actually seeing a drop and they're feeling like crap. Yeah, they've got ketones to pick them up because they're in ketosis, and the ketones may be working okay, but that ultra low sugar may affect them when it drops too low. So here's an experiment that I'm doing, and I'm going to ask you to participate in this experiment. What I'd like you to do is about 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes before you go on your run, eat a couple of pieces of bacon, eat maybe a boiled egg, eat something that is high fat, even if it's a couple of pieces of cheese. Put some fat into your stomach and give it about 20 minutes to get out of your stomach into your intestine, and let's see the effect on your CGM. Because yes, there's going to be some fat there, but I'd also like there to be a bit of protein there, and let's see if that substrate kicks in the gluconeogenesis. But it may be that you're so fat adapted that your gluconeogenesis is going toward ketones and not toward sugar. So while we see this on the CGM and it's opposite to the effect that I saw, the questions are, number one, did it affect your performance? Did you feel lightheaded? Did you feel like you were dragging? Or it could be that your body just didn't need that extra sugar because you were running off ketones. The final part is, paradoxically, did you have an excessive release of insulin relative to your insulin sensitivity, and that could be a little bit dangerous, and the way to modify that is by eating some protein and some fat beforehand. I don't know, I don't have the answers, but I'm aware of this in other athletes, and we're starting to look at this by looking at their insulin sensitivity, by measuring their C-peptide and the insulin, fasting at a different day, and then seeing whether fat protein loading before a race, before a training run, makes a difference. But I love the nuance of this question. I congratulate you on your journey, and we are learning continuously. So this is an answer hopefully I'll have for you in the near future. But thanks very much for the question, and congratulations on your journey. And this is a very interesting question. This comes from Daria Dubek, and she says, I'm 10 years ago on my birthday, I had a lap band surgery. And it was actually by a colleague of mine. Since that time, she's had issues with her band, and she's had all the fluid taken out, which basically negates the effect of the band. And there's no restriction. And coupled with that, she then had knee replacement surgery and ultimately a flood of unexpected emotional trauma without having effective emotion management skills. And the long story is that she ended up putting on a lot of pounds. In other words, she went back to carbohydrates to soothe, numb, and obliterate her emotional distress. I'm at a loss. I do not know whether or not I should invest in keto or invest in a revision to a sleeve gastrectomy. What should I do? Great question, Dario. The first thing is step back and understand what happened. What happened is you originally had a surgery and you lost weight. And that's what bariatric surgery does. You can eat ice cream and Oreo cookies all day long, and for a year or two, the surgery will work because of pure caloric reduction. It's basically comfortable starvation, and pretty much everybody, if the surgery is done correctly and managed correctly, loses a massive amount of weight. Irrespective of your diet, that's calorie reduction, that's weight loss. But if you do not address your behavior, if you do not address your relationship with sugar and starch as an emotion management tool, then what happens is you slowly figure out ways around your surgery. And it doesn't matter if it's a band, a bypass, a sleeve, a duodenal switch. You either die of malnutrition or you die of obesity again, because what happens is you figure out a way around it and you go sloppy and you go snacky. And when we go sloppy and snacky, it's not broccoli and steak we're eating, it's sugar and starch that we're eating. So you overwhelm the system. And even if the system is still working well, that you can't eat a lot, it's not about the number of lanes on the highway, it's about the cars on the lane and how many cars there are over time. So what most people do, and 85% of people will fail their surgery irrespective of what that operation is, bypass, band, sleeve, switch, will fail that surgery within 5 to 10 years of having the surgery because they lost weight, but they never dealt with their obesity, which is their carbohydrate addiction. So, and that's what happened to you. Unexpected stresses came into your life. You didn't have a new, diverse, effort-based emotion management system, and you went back to the carbohydrates. Okay, it happens. No blame there, but recognition. So now you ask, should I go keto or should I have a sleeve? Well, after 2 years, you've beaten your band, and it'll never ever work for you again because you know your way around the system. Okay? I've got a dog who can get out of his cage, and nothing I do can keep him in his cage. So guess what? The cage doesn't work anymore, and he's not in it. I didn't like the cage idea in the first place. Anyway, besides the point, you've beaten that surgery. So yes, the benefit for recurrent weight loss is potentially to do another surgery. But that surgery will fail in exactly the same way the band and every other surgery did because you haven't addressed your obesity. So my advice to you is, number one, begin to address your addiction to carbohydrates. And a keto diet is not there to lose weight. The ketogenic diet is there to address carbohydrate addiction. That's a critically important concept. People who go on keto to lose weight, people who go on keto to get rid of their diabetes ultimately fail. 98% of people that try a diet will fail. If you become ketogenic because you understand that it's a carbohydrate addiction and you want to treat your addiction and you use addiction methodology, then as a byproduct, your weight will come down. As a byproduct, your diabetes will go into remission. But the ketogenic approach, the ketogenic lifestyle needs to continue lifelong because as soon as you go back, your diabetes and your obesity comes back. So go on a ketogenic diet. And then if you're struggling, if you're having relapse after relapse, then add in a sleeve. But don't have a sleeve, don't have another operation because you don't want to do a ketogenic diet. Do it to help you to be more successful at a ketogenic way of life. Otherwise, in 5 to 10 years, you're going to be sitting with the same issue. And it's amazing for me because I come from the band era. I love the band. I still do. But the expert bariatric surgeons out there blew the band out of the water. It doesn't work. It fails. It's got all these complications. Bullshit, it doesn't. The band doesn't fail. It's the management of the band that fails and the people that are placed on a low-calorie diet, not a carbohydrate restriction diet, that fail. A band that is adjusted to the point of restriction but not over-adjusted to the point of obstruction using fluoro and a ketogenic diet makes the band successful for life. So the funny part is, 5-10 years ago, people just condemned the hell out of the band. It doesn't work, it doesn't work. The sleeve is the gold standard. Now, 10 years into sleeves, guess what? Oh, the sleeve is failing, everybody's doing bad, everyone's got reflux, It's not the sleeve, guys. Wake up and smell the roses. It's the absence of a ketogenic diet. When you use a calorie restrictive approach and you teach your patients to snack and drink smoothies, hell, you're teaching them how to fail their surgery. So now the gold standard is, well, it used to be gastric bypass. But guess what? Gastric bypass, people were failing in droves. So now they're doing duodenal switch. They're sewing people's mouths to their arseholes, getting them to poop out everything they eat, and oh, miracles, we got weight loss. Yeah, but people are dying of malnutrition. All these surgeries work, all of them fail, not depending on the surgery, but depending on whether the patient understands and addresses their way of life. If you can discuss carbohydrate addiction in the context of their surgery, the surgery is going to cause the weight loss. The carbohydrate addiction resolution is going to resolve the disease, but not as an endpoint, as a byproduct, because that carb addiction methodology has to continue for life. Then you can have a successful symbiotic relationship with your surgery. And even if you've had surgery before and are listening to this, put yourself on a ketogenic diet, see if you can recapture the effectiveness of your surgery, irrespective of what it is. And if you need help, come and see me. Text 561-617-0642 and we can help you if you've had any kind of surgery and are struggling.